Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Thank you to Relevant Wealth Advisors for the support of this program. It's a real honor for me as a longtime music journalist to be here with Jan Wenner, an icon of our profession and co-founder of Rolling Stone magazine. And it's great to see so many of you here in person. And the Commonwealth Club will be having more in-person events in the weeks and months to come. You can get information about that at commonwealthclub.org. And I want to make sure to say hello to everyone watching online as well. So as Adam mentioned, we're both sort of Marin County boys. I've been a journalist for a long time, and I thought I knew as much as there is to know about music scene in Marin. But until I read Jan's book, I didn't really know that he spent a great deal of his childhood in Marin County, the early years of your childhood, on the quintessential Marin County street, Rainbow Road. And you also began your journalism career as a publisher there. Yeah. So would you mind painting a little picture of what your childhood was like as a Marin County guy?
My childhood started in the 50s in Marin County in Los Ranchitos, north of San Rafael. It was at a time when 101 was a 2-lane road, and if you were going north, you had to take a left turn on the highway to get into where we lived. It was before the Civic Center was built, and certainly way before Terra Linda. It was kind of a real suburban American dream type childhood. My parents were both in the Army and Navy and moved from New York to the West Coast right after the war to kind of pursue the American dream and build their own house and buy their own convertibles and started me. And Marin was also kind of quintessential suburb, which was being built at that time where everybody coming from the war, the beginning of the baby boom, where homes were being built and the public school system was being built, and we had a Nike Air Force Base or missile silos in the hills nearby, and Hamilton Air Force Base was in the north, so you go to sleep at night if you heard planes overhead, if you were young, you were worrying that the Russians were coming to drop the bomb and so forth. So seriously, that was the stuff of nightmares. And it's also where I started reading the Chronicle at 8 years old and listening to a little early transistor radio set under the covers and listening to what was KEWB then maybe, or KFWB or KFRC. I don't know, Hires Request Hour, right, which is where I first started hearing music. The only other musical roots there, and I left when I was 12, I moved out and went away to school. The only musical roots is that we used to go to Camp Lagunitas in the summers, and then was rented after I'd long gone by the Dead, and they kind of lived there and used as a rehearsal space for years. Anyway, that's my experience with my music. Those are my musical roots, the Hires Radio Hour and the Dead.
But you also started your first publication.
Oh, I forgot the question.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was, for some reason, I don't know why, I decided to start a neighborhood newspaper called the Weekly Trumpet, and we'd type it out on a ditto stencil in quarter pages in different angles, so you could then, when you got the dittos back, you fold them half and a quarter, and sold them throughout the neighborhood for I think a dime each. And it was called the Weekly Trumpet, and it had in it, news, the local gossip. I wrote editorials about the pulse rates or something. The Eisenhower years. I don't know why I was writing editorials, and we did that for about 6 or 7 months with some friends of mine, and to split up the earnings, split up our $40 net profit. We got our picture in an independent journal, and otherwise it would have died. It would be little noticed today. But and then I at Santa Venetia High School, or not Santa Venetia Middle School, did a newspaper there. And by the time I got to boarding school, I was the editor of the yearbook, and the editor of the school newspaper, and a local columnist, and also had started an underground newspaper of sorts a student newspaper, not an alumni newspaper. In my school, the theme of my school was very nautical because the headmaster, this is an excruciating detail, I apologize, was from graduate of the Naval Academy. So the theme was very nautical to school, and the teams were called the Mariners, and the yearbook was the Dolphin, and the newspaper was the Main Sheet, and so forth. So I called my in an underground newspaper, the Sardine. We had 3 issues of the Sardine, then it was banned. I was literally banned. It was kicked off campus. But in those 3 issues, the slogan of the newspaper was "All the news that fits," and the main column on page 1 was random notes. So, if you know what random notes means, maybe it doesn't resonate. But
That would show up later in
another
publication we're familiar with. And you were, you know what I found interesting is that in those days, Marin was a very blue-collar place. And I think you said, you know, there were class differences between you and the kids. You know, you had trouble fitting in. You were a self-described problem child, you know, kind of.
I wouldn't my mother described it to me.
Oh.
My mother said I was the most difficult child she'd ever met, and she used to write about child psychology professionally. She said, I know what I'm speaking of. I mean, it was beyond problems. I was rated.
And your friends Your friends were more, you know, blue-collar kids, which is funny because now Marin is one of the most affluent places in the country, and in those days it wasn't.
Well, no, I mean, at those times, Ross was around.
Yeah, right.
And some other suburbs like that, Kentwood and Tehran, Belvedere, and so forth. But where we were, north of San Rafael, there were tract homes on the other side of the tracks. And there were homes on my side, our side, where people built their own homes and bought a couple of acres. Anyway, but because I was kicked out of all these other schools, I was in the local public school, and my friends were like, you know, blue-collar workers, as I say in my book. My best friends were, one was a fireman's son, and the other, his dad was in San Quentin. I don't know what for, but, you know. And it was, you know, just a different way of growing up. You know, pretty much all Catholic neighborhood, and the local Catholic church was across the street from the school. So on Fridays, all the kids would be in, you know, the uniforms and be going to catechism, and, you know, we'd be sneaking off, you know, because we weren't like that.
And then you went off to boarding school,
Right.
Chadwick School, which is kind of a posh boarding school in Southern California, where you were more in your element, right?
Yeah.
Liza Minnelli was one of your classmates.
Yeah,
Was she was she a girlfriend of yours too?
for a week. But it wasn't so much. It wasn't. There's movie stars. It was just, you know, those kind of schools get self-selected for intelligent kids and smarter kids and more sophisticated, wherever they are, as opposed to public schools. And I just didn't quite. I was brighter than everybody, and it was difficult.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that wasn't the prize value. And there I felt, you know, a little more, you know, there were more Jewish kids, and it was just, you know, I felt more at home being posh, that I am born to be posh. But
that came later. I hate to ask this question, but I need to. But
you don't have to, you know.
I don't have.
Okay.
I'm going to though. You said you wanted to set the record straight with your book after Joe Hagan's 2017 biography, which you helped him with.
Yeah.
And then you weren't happy with it. So what went wrong with that?
I just basically, I had a firm idea of what I wanted in a book, and I had wanted to write it myself. Or I knew I didn't want to write it myself. So I was happy when this opportunity came along, but picked the wrong person. I gave access to me, my friends, my files, and all the things, thinking I had a good journalist here, and I thought I was so wrong, and I didn't even ask for approval or anything like that. Not thinking that a journalist should be left to be independent. But it turned out he was not a good reporter, really oriented towards kind of gossipy, smarmy stuff. I had an agenda, probably ended up disliking me or something. And it just turned out to be dull and not very informative, and just missed the whole point. And when it came to the opportunity that I had between retirement and my health problems, now I had time on my hands. Naturally, I thought, well, I'm going to write this now, finally, because I didn't like that. I never referred it or tried to in any way refute it. I just started from scratch. And I wanted to, the idea of the book that I wanted to do was I thought that I wanted to really write a history of our times, or a look at our times and understanding, try to get that's you, baby. Okay. Please turn off your watches before I right now. And I thought that I'd read a lot of stuff about the 60s, the baby boom, or the politics of the times, and it's all kind of really thin stuff and kind of one side, very narrow. I find pretty dull, not interesting. Nobody really caught it, I didn't think. I thought you could catch this thing, which we all saw as being such magic stuff in rock and roll, and then such important stuff on the political and social, cultural stages and arenas, that you could tell that story if I combine my own personal growing story, because I was like a leading edge, typical baby boomer, or, typical enough, had been in all the right places where it all had happened throughout this thing, from Marin to Berkeley, student protests in San Francisco, music and so forth. And if you told the story, my story alone wouldn't be very interesting, but it would be a good narrative device to go through the history of Rolling Stone, the building of that organization, the people who made it, and where they're from, and the kind of where their motives are, and what Rolling Stone's purview was we covered. And discussed that you would really end up with a story of our times, because Rolling Stone covered about everything.
Right.
And I think that's what I ended up with here, and I'm pleased with it and proud of it. It reads well, and I think it's authentic in that way. The Hagen book was just kind of a quasi-Hatchet kind of job.
No, it reads really well. I enjoyed it, and it's very lively, and so congratulations on it.
Thank you.
So after Chadwick, you go off to UC Berkeley, and you write in your book that LSD and music took over my life. And so what was your college experience? I mean, this was a very tumultuous time, the 60s. How was that for you? And how did that set you up for what was to follow?
Well, I have a character witness here in the audience, which I won't identify by name, but Ned is sitting there. He was a big buddy of mine in college. He was in Stanford, by the way. First off, there's the inherent college experience of, going off and becoming an adult and becoming independent for the first time. But, the Berkeley thing was really totally unique. I mean, it was fine when I got there in '63, but I had joined a student radical group called Slate at the time. But the next year, the fervor started on campus demonstrations, and the civil rights movement was underway. Berkeley was a main recruiting area for sending college students to the South to be on the freedom rides. And so it was a big part of the agenda with civil rights. And by some kind of weird time spark, who knows what, student protests began on the Berkeley campus when I was there with the free speech movement. And I got deeply involved in that, as inevitably everybody in the Berkeley campus in one way or the other kept taken up in this hurricane of fervor around that. It was an obsession. It was all anybody did. School virtually stopped, even though classes were still going on, because everybody was so swept up in this thing. Every student, every faculty member, the government of California, and the Reagan, all of it. What was it? So anyway, that was galvanizing. That was radicalizing in a way. It was during the free speech movement, their protest, the beginning of it, that I was walking by a big rally in a Sproul Hall Plaza, where a big sit-in was underway surrounding a police car with a student they had arrested, or a non-student they had arrested, a guy named Jack Weinberg, who coincidentally was the person who invented the slogan, "Never trust anybody over 30." Yeah. They should have taken him away. But anyway, he refused to be arrested. And the several thousand students were around preventing that from happening. So it was going by, and then Joan Baez was singing at the protest from the steps, and she was in the voice of an angel. I mean, her beautiful voice was singing the Dylan song, "With God on Our Side." And in that moment, hearing her and understanding those lyrics, kind of crystallized for me the kind of random thinking I've been doing about what am I going to do in my life, and watching these protests, rolling. I had my political side and my socializing side, and and it was the thing that just made me focus. Say, well, it's time to stand for something, to do something, to move it. So anyway, then after that was drugs and music, and the combination turned into being Rainbow Road.
Yeah, I mean,
Here we are today.
you were at Ken Kesey's second acid test.
But I was at his second out.
Second acid test, right?
I went down. I was a big Stones fan, and they were playing in December '65, I think, in San Jose, the San Jose Civic Auditorium.
Yeah.
And right after that, there was a 3 blocks away, the acid test.
Yeah, and
Some frat house.
And the house band was not the Stones.
It was the Dead. Yeah. And it was their second appearance as the Dead, or maybe even their first appearance. And I didn't know. So I walked up to the person who later turned out to be Phil Lesh. I said, "What's your name?" I'm stoned on acid. And he's obviously stoned on acid. He goes, "The Grateful Dead." And you go, "Whoa, wow."
Great thing to hear when you're on acid, right? At some point, you came under the wing of Ralph J. Gleason, who is the jazz critic, supposed jazz critic for the Chronicle, really music writer. First adult to really recognize, the significance of rock and roll, and to be a supporter and advocate for rock and roll. How big an influence was he on you, and what role did he play in co-founding Rolling Stone?
Well, he's a big influence on me. He was my really first adult mentor.
Right.
And I, like everybody in Barrie, then read his column 3 times a week in the Chronicle. It's the only thing really going to be about rock and roll music and kind of student activities and lefty kind of stuff, although he was a jazz critic and was very well respected national jazz critic, and that's what he was there for. So he was stepping out with this stuff, and he got ridiculed really for liking rock and roll so much and thinking his idea was that the Beatles were fantastic musicians, and Stones, Dylan, and that some of these people were the poets and the poets of our time, and the music was very valuable, worthwhile. It was the key to what was going on in the country and with young people, and should be paid very close attention to. But his fellow adults mocked him. And I said, well, he's 40 years old, but he's 40 years old, but he can't decide whether he's 3 16-year-olds or 4 12-year-olds. Well, he loved that. He really did. So as a student, I met him when I was a student there, and writing at the time a column in his kind of imitative of his, and I was writing for the Daily Californian once a week. And it was about my adventures that week at the Film Auditorium, or going out with my friends, like Ned there particularly was a character in my column. And and we were just kindred spirits. I looked up to him, and he liked what I was doing. He thought I was a talented young person he'd take under his wing, and he liked mentoring people, and so I spent tons of time hanging out there. Anyway, when it came time to do Rolling Stone, he was the person I turned to for advice as to what to do with my life. And we tried various things, and we finally settled on, well, the only thing you can get done is if you do it yourself, because nobody's going to do it for you. And I had tried freelancing and writing, but there was no outlets for it. No one outlet that commissioned me a review of Sgt. Pepper's, and summer of '67 rejected it. It was a New York magazine called High Fidelity, which was a big magazine. They said I was too hyperbolic. So
about Sgt. Pepper.
It was, I couldn't write for anybody else, so I'm going to have to write for myself. So he helped me shape it. The name Rolling Stone was a recommendation from him based on Like a Rolling Stone, an essay he wrote about it. And he, really oversaw it, in a way. I mean, I did all the work, it wasn't, but he shepherded along kind of spiritually and journalistically and ethically, and, introduced the people we need to know right away. But, I owe him tons. He's a great man.
Yeah.
And did far more than just Rolling Stone. He saved the San Francisco rock scene,
Yeah, he was really a mentor. You did a little stint at Ramparts before that with Warren Hickle and Robert Shear. It had some influence probably on, you picked up a few ideas, but you started Rolling Stone on a shoestring, really, some investments from
Family, my mother, my mother-in-law, my stepmother,
Ralph through someone. Right?
Ralph,
Yeah.
myself.
And it was 67, the summer of love in San Francisco, when San Francisco was the center of the countercultural universe and radiating peace and love and music all over the world at that point. So, and Rolling
In that
Stone,
year, of 67, that summer of 67, Sgt. Pepper's came out. KMPX, the first FM underground station, so-called freeform, whatever, was founded. Bill Graham was working here,
right.
and Rolling Stone started. And cumulatively was sending a message out the entire world, which was, come on, join the fun, And the Beatles were saying, get aboard, Anyway, so all that happened at once, and it was, quite spectacular. It was not, and the Summer of Love is kind of background to that, but
Yeah, and Rolling Stone was really the first magazine or publication to take rock and youth culture seriously. Before that there was really nothing. To tell the truth. And you said, can you talk about the magazine's mission as part of what you called the revolution of culture and consciousness? I think is the way you put it.
Well, I thought, and Ralph thought that it was through music you had this prism into society, a unique view of it, and it was a shared view of it by people who were Dylan fans and Stones fans and Beatles fans, and it was an understanding of a little bit of what the mainstream side was in, the kind of the culture of it, not to describe it at length, but it was a viewpoint based on kind of the idea that of human justice, of equal rights, of respect for other people, of respect for other cultures, all the values we've come to embrace, but they weren't quite articulated there yet, and they were most articulated, particularly for young people, in this music. Yeah. They weren't articulated in newspapers, magazines, TV stations. There was no other, there wasn't a lot of books about it, or literature. There had been a beatnik generation and some stuff there, which is not quite the same, but to this was what this expressed the yearning and ideas of young people, of the baby boom, of what I've always called the best educated, wealthiest, and biggest cohort of the American population in the history of this United States. And it was coming of an age at a particular time of technology and against the background of integration, racial integration, beginning, and this music. And the music expressed it all, and it also happened to contain these several really genius artists.
Yeah.
And rock and roll musicians, fully all working together and all working off of each other, listening to each other. Dylan, Stones, Beatles, many others. Were equivalent to Paris in the 20s. Yeah. Right, to be a number of great impressionist artists or working together and seeing each other work. Matisse, Picasso, Leger, and other. But just this confidence of people. Anyway, what was the question again? What was the point of it? So Ralph articulated that vision well, and it was really to promote that vision and the musicians and the quality of the art and the culture that went with it that we set out to, and nobody else was doing it. And Ralph called it, we called the music the tribal telegraph, or the glue that held the generation together. Right. And we were mocked for that widely, and people, you're not gonna stop the war in Vietnam with consciousness and this and that. And it's true, many things take place, but I think without the anti-war movement of consciousness, the war would probably still be going on. It still is, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Just a different place, same people, same players. And I think that's what it took. Politics had become corrupt, kind of bankrupt philosophically. It's too simplistic to say that the two parties were the same things, but they were in so many ways.
They were, yeah. Do you think Rolling Stone could have gotten off the ground anywhere but San Francisco?
Possibly, but I think this was a unique place for it to be nurtured, away from the pressures of Los Angeles or New York, and in a community that was so based on the arts and the liberalness of the attitude and the kind of freewheeling spirit of the times, the kind of laissez-faire spirit about living, which was what we exemplified.
Yeah, so John Lennon he was featured in your debut issue, right? The first one. And he once called, I love this story in the book, he once called you, and out of the blue, I think, he and Yoko. He said, we're coming over to
Right.
the offices. And then you ended up spending the afternoon with him. Could you talk a little bit about what that experience was like with, John and Yoko? And
I have been talking to her and him for the last year or two on the phone and by telex and all that stuff. And they were giving us little interviews all the time. We were covering their peace activities, in the bed-ins. And so we were their kind of mouthpiece for it. And I'd been asking John since really the first year of Rolling Stone to do an interview. Now, at the time, the Beatles were still the Beatles. They were sealed in a really pretty hermetic bubble because they didn't want any more trouble after John saying he was more popular than Jesus. And they were the lovable mop tops, and that image was very carefully guarded, even as they started taking drugs and going to India and all that stuff. But in any case, they came to San Francisco, and I had met Yoko before. They came to San Francisco, and they called out of the blue and said, we're here. And so come on down. And they came in 20, 30 minutes later and toured the office. And the first time I met John, the whole place was agog. As was I. I was trying to be totally cool. But, he was nice, disarming, charming to everybody. He knew what it took and what and we did all that. Then we were going to go back to the hotel, and then Jane and I were taking them there, and they were staying at the San Francisco Hilton. And furthermore, they were poolside, in that little pool. They had some in the middle of the place, and so they had a cabana. So, they were in the most public situation possible. So first we packed them up, and we moved them up to Huntington. And then spent the weekend, going out to dinner, seeing San Francisco, touring. And then that relationship led then to my doing Lennon and Remembers about 6 months later.
Didn't you go see Let It Be together with him?
We went and saw Let It Be together, and he said that they had never seen it before. There's some empty theater on Upper Polk that we went to in the middle of a Friday afternoon. Nobody's in the theater, and for us watching it, and the movie's obviously about the breakup of the Beatles, or that's what it looked like. And when we walked outside, he started crying, and we all started crying. We all huddled and hugged each other. 4 minutes started crying. Kind of pretty mind-blowing experience. That the beat, I was 25 or 24. But footnote to that is Michael Lindsay Hogg, who's the director of that, the original director of it, called me last week, said he read that and that he has screened it for them like 3 months before, and he has it in his diary and all. But I just think they'll remember that John said he'd never seen it before. I don't.
That's good enough.
They're both true, I'm sure.
You have an eye for literary talent, obviously, and you were a great editor.
Thank you.
And you championed the careers of some big names: Tom Wolfe, P.J. O'Rourke, John Landau, my old friend Joe Esterhaas, and of course the inimitable Hunter S. Thompson, among others. And I love the story of you meeting Thompson or Hunter in your office, him coming in your office. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, meeting Hunter Thompson for the first time?
Rather puzzling. I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea whether it was in a coat and tie or much. I read the Angels book. I knew he rode with the Angels, and he was running for sheriff because he was coming to discuss doing that article with me.
In Aspen.
In Aspen.
Yeah. Right.
And, I met a lot of people, but he walks in 2.5 to 3 hours late and walks in my office, and he ambles in, and Hunter was like 6'2" or so. And he ambles in, he's a bulky guy, kind of awkward, though very strong. And he's got like Converse sneakers, and he's wearing a pair of shorts, and he's got a rayon shirt, which has kind of got red and white circles all over it, and a medallion around his neck, and he's smoking out of a Targard filter, and he's got a bubble hairdo, a gray-haired, like a woman's hairdo, a bubble where did you remember that?
Yeah.
If you remember the bubble, like that. And he comes in, he's carrying a leather satchel, and he sets it on my round desk, unzips it, opens it up, and starts pulling out things that he's going to need for the meeting we're about to have. And so he pulls out, a carton of cigarettes and a pack of Targard filters there, and a bottle of whiskey here, 6-pack of that, a buck knife, what do you have in there? Notebooks, magazines, what else did he have there? Several other things. He had a flashlight, it was important. And the kind with that police baton heavy end on it, and then and a siren that you could, with a suction cup on it, you could stick on the top of a car, flick on, and put that down and sat down with all the stuff on that there. Can openers, lighters, Zippo lighters. And then he proceeded to talk for 2 hours. And, so at the end of it, I was like, wow, I mean, we had discussed the piece and all kinds of stuff, and he was just great. And it was like, but I had to leave. I had to go home. And that led from there on to this kind of wonderful, but began as a wacky, good, fun relationship to a deep, deep friendship in the families, and a deep relationship as editor and writer, where we really could lock together, where I could really be of service to him and knew where he was going, what he was doing with things, and be his backup when he couldn't make it on time, and with the same mission, and we had shared the same ideas, and also shared the idea that we had this wonderful, stage in Rolling Stone from which to speak, and in which I would hit our stage together, and we wanted to have a real influence on the politics of the country. And he was talking about these people, the hippies. He said, don't know Kent State from Kent cigarettes. We'd have to mobilize them, and that's what we set out to do.
Yeah, and I didn't realize what an influential figure he was in steering the coverage, especially your political coverage. I always think of him as a Doonesbury character, Uncle Duke, with the drug spots in front of his eyes and everything. But he was really, and you even considered having him as a partner for a while. Is that right?
Well, he wanted to be partners, and he kept talking about Henry Lewis and Britton Haddon, who was his early partner in founding us. And I said, this is not going to work, Hunter. We are partners, but if we go, you're going to take all my money and spend it buying a hotel or a car dealership somewhere. That's just, so we used to joke with each other, but it wasn't that. He would always look after my interests. I would always look after his interests for all times, and did. And mine more after his interests. His more after his interests than my interests. But he was a clear-eyed guy about politics and power and writing and all that stuff, and he wasn't really Uncle Duke, except in part, and then it's really not that character Gary came up with, and that was a character. It wasn't Gary's character, but it ended up trapping Hunter somehow.
Yeah, right. There were a couple of pieces in the magazine that really put Rolling Stone on the map, in those days, and one of them was John Lennon interview, the bitter John Lennon interview. Lennon remembers. Mm-hmm. She later called Lennon regrets for saying it. And the other one was Rolling Stone's kind of wall-to-wall coverage of Altamont. Mm-hmm. And you laid the blame for the violence and the death of one of the concert goers at the feet of Mick Jagger and the Stones.
Not entirely. No, we laid the blame on everybody.
On everybody, but they weren't excluded.
They weren't excluded, and they couldn't blame it on their people. They didn't do the due diligence. Bill Graham was at fault because he didn't help put it on. The Dead's managers, everybody. It was just a whole complete, doomed.
You were friends with Jagger at that point, and he was not happy about the whole thing.
No, he didn't. He wasn't, no. But we had no choice really but to go ahead and do it as we saw our journalistic mission to be, but at the risk of our relationship with the Stones, which was a risk, although I thought, knowing Mick, even then I knew him relatively well, or at least I knew him to respect him and his judgment as an intellectual character, that he would come to see it and get over it, which of course he did. But it was stories in our backyard. So I got home, I didn't go, but on Monday morning when I woke up after the Sunday concert, there's the Examiner or something, because the Chronicle had closed too early, calling it Woodstock West, and I was also getting calls from everybody who had been there on our staff saying it was the worst thing, it was this, that, and on, and so we really realized what was the real story was, and that we had 20 writers there and photographers, and we could put this one together in a way nobody else had, and we did. And it led, that and our coverage of Charles Manson led directly to our winning the first National Magazine Award when we were little pipsqueaks here in San Francisco.
Right. And the Lennon interview, which he kind of bitterly, talked about, a lot of people probably, as I said, he regretted it. But you put it out as a book,
Right.
published it as a book later, which he, against his wishes.
Right.
And he kind of, what happened then? I mean, he didn't like that.
He didn't want me to publish it. I wanted to publish it. It's my right to do so. I didn't really like going against his wishes and what he wanted, especially after all I owed to him. And I felt sick about it for a long time. I made the mistake. But later on, as I came to see it, at first I thought I was just being terrible in person. And then as I came to see, not at all. It was, I'm not a duty exact, but I was well within the purview. But unfortunately, I discussed this with people, and so there's been blown up out of proportion.
Did he ever forgive you?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And you had a nice relationship with Yoko after.
Oh, yeah. And became very close to friends with Yoko after. And she made me the godfather of her son, and she's the godfather of one of my children, and her son Sean is the godfather of another of my children. So we ended up in a very close relationship with that family.
You weren't as close with Paul McCartney early, but
Well, I didn't know Paul then.
but you became later, right?
Yeah, because, if you're deep in a friendship with Yoko, which we were, and we Matt and I, Jane and I, we all used to travel all the time together, and Matt and I would spend Christmas and vacation and things, either Christmas or Thanksgiving, going way back, even before then, for years. But you inevitably are part of her view of the world, and particularly her view of the Beatles and the relationship between John and Paul. So, I was on John's side in this dispute, and I felt guilty about it, and I think that Paul got that. But, it never really affected his relationship with Rolling Stone or too much. And, he's, in the last 4 or 5, 10 years, he's been around New York a lot, and so,
Right. Despite all the successes of Rolling Stone in San Francisco, you had 500,000 subscribers, I think, at that one point. National awards, as you mentioned. By the mid-'70s, some of the luster was going off, San Francisco and the golden age of the magazine a little bit. And at the same time, you said that you were tired of the ethos of San Francisco and its fading hippie orthodoxy. And you kind of sent shockwaves through the town and through your staff by announcing that you were moving Rolling Stone to New York. Why did you feel you had to move to New York?
Well, basically, if you're going to be in the magazine business and want to get big, you have to be in New York. That's where the talent pool is. For writers, for the people in that kind of business, or advertising, selling, circulation, it's a New York-based business. And it doesn't thrive in San Francisco. No national magazine that ever thrives in San Francisco, or Los Angeles, or Chicago, with the exception of Playboy. It's just, that's where it is. So, come 76, we have half the magazine is in staff in New York doing business, and half is here producing the magazine, editors. And I'm in New York more and more and more, I'm commuting back and forth. That can't go on. So the decision was easy, consolidate it in New York. As it happens, simultaneously, the kind of cultural glow of San Francisco had been fading, and the moment for that particular era had passed, both artistically and, I think, socially. I mean, if you want to go live in Marin County, go live in Marin's great, something like that. But if we stayed here, we'd never have gotten where we got. And I was saying, if you want to go to New York, if you're ambitious, you go to New York, and if not, you can stay here and grow up here, and before you know it, your hair is gray and you're still living in Marin, and that's that. There you are. So you stayed. I said, come, follow me.
You didn't ask me to go. Why did I do? I would have gone.
The only person I asked to go who didn't go was Ben Fong-Torres.
Right, Ben.
And stayed here, thrives, and,
It was interesting, though. You said that, you told me before, of all the people who went with you to San Francisco, all the relationships didn't last.
Every couple that came all broke up. And in the end, very few people ended up still working there. Well, after 5 or 10 years, you move on. But I think once you get to New York, you really have to decide what you're going to do, who you're going to be, and what growing up is about. I mean, if you're not prepared to work hard and be ambitious, you don't fit in that situation there, and you're best not. But the face of culture was changed at the same time. Mm-hmm. And the cultural weight of the country was moving back, I didn't calculate this or see it, to New York. And people, all the artists were moving back to New York at that time. Mailer was coming back and so on. And this kind of like society there just started picking up again. Soon enough, it was, the Reagans were in the White House, and money and ambition, all that stuff became powerful in the downtown scene, Studio 54. All kinds of arts became the center of the art world again. And we were in the middle of it. We were on that big stage and playing that game.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about this being in San Francisco and all that. You talk openly about your homosexuality in the book. Saying that you felt the first stirrings of that when you were in boarding school. And after 26 years of marriage, you had 3 children. You left your wife and 3 sons, and now you're married to Matt Nye, and very happily, from what I can say. And you were being true to yourself. It was kind of it was a hard thing to do, a hard time for you in reading about it. And but you made it work. It sounds like you have 3 children now with Matt, 6 kids altogether. What's your life like now with your family?
We all live in New York City. We spend all summers at the beach. My wife and our family the 2 families are like 10 minutes apart in driving on the same beaches. They're kind of the children flow back and forth house to house all the time. We have dinner all the time. There's, it's without literally putting everybody in the same place. It's very much what they call a blended family, I guess. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to raise the kids all together as one unit. And both my ex-wife and my husband, Matt, here get along better with each other than they do with me. And they have common enemy, so. And it's really worked out fantastically. It was a rough thing going into it.
Sure.
I was having a good time because I was, in love. And it's tough breaking up any marriage, and it was tough that. But it came back together really nicely. Due to particularly the tolerance and understanding and the love that my partners have.
Well, let's see. We're running long on time, unfortunately, but let's see. Oh, here's some questions.
We didn't get any gossiping about Mick or Bruce or Bono.
Yeah.
Bob,
what was your favorite interview? Yeah. What was your? Let's do some gossip. Talk about Bono.
Bono is a great, fun character. Very Irish. Talks a lot. Magnetic. Only sleeps 5 hours a day. Can't stop talking. A charming, wonderful guy. Of course, a great performer, but. Loves to tell stories and is on a first-name basis with everybody in the world, including the Pope, I think, at this point. And quite the whirlwind. We're neighbors in New York City, around the corner from us. He and his wife are the godfathers, a godmother, godparents, our daughter. And he's got a book coming up, too. You'll probably be interviewing him in a month.
I hope so. And Jagger. I think I saw your interview, Bruce interviewing you in New York, and you were saying that Jagger is a tough interview because
Mick is just English to the core, and in which you're very good at small talk, good chitter chatter, good social, skills and grace, but you don't talk about deep stuff. And I think for the most part, Mick is bored with talking about himself all the time, and just doesn't have the patience for it, and he's reluctant to spill the beans. He's extremely smart and can be very insightful. He's a really smart and thoughtful guy and knows that. But doing the interview is tough. Ask him, all these things, who wrote this song, who wrote that, where was this, and he's trying to be cooperative, but just, not in him.
Yeah.
But he's a terrific person and fun to be with.
And Bruce Springsteen has become a close friend of mine. I mean, he's the one who interviewed you at the 92nd Y in New York recently, which I watched on video. What's your relationship like with him?
Very good, very close. We see them frequently. Also godparents.
Is your godparent too?
Sorry?
Your godparents too, of his kids?
No, he is godparents. He and his wife are godparents with another of my kids.
Oh, okay. All right.
But he's terrific. He's really one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met, and self-taught, really literate, great eye for American music, American literature, terribly shy, yet also very forthcoming on stage, and in love with his music.
Let's see, somebody wants to know, an audience question, can you talk about your relationship, personal and professional, with Annie Leibovitz?
Well, the story of Annie is she was going to San Francisco Art Institute. She came into our offices one day when she was like 20 or something with a portfolio of photographs. She wasn't studying photography she was studying painting, but she was intrigued by photography. She left a bunch of stuff for us. We ended up using one of them. And then she came back and we started giving her little assignments. And, she was a whirlwind at the time, so full of energy, so willing to do anything, go on any assignment, go anywhere, lug tons of equipment around. She'd go on the road with our writers. She'd move in with the group. She'd be with them 3 or 4 or 5 days at a time, get the most intimate access, and had this great eye for getting portraits where people, you felt that you were so close to them. It just evolved into her style, this kind of penetrating, thoughtful look, that she gets out of everybody. And of course became a very dear friend. She was very close with my wife. And at a point, we really had to let her go as the only way she could resolve her own personal problems and her drug problems and that. So she ended up getting onto a much bigger stage even than all the claims she was getting at Rolling Stone and her reputation there. And working for Condé Nast over the years in commercials, she's now considered the world's greatest portrait photographer. And she took the picture on the cover.
On the cover of your book.
And, my daughter and her daughter are great friends. They go to school together, they ride together, and she's a neighbor. She's 2 blocks away. You can't shake these people,
Before we're running out of time, but just last, we want to talk a little about politics. Rolling Stone was very big in covering politics and the voice of our generation in political ways. I think you interviewed Al Gore, Clinton, Obama. You interviewed Obama after he lost after Hillary lost the day after. Can you quickly tell what that?
Sure. I interviewed him 3 different times.
Yeah. Before
he became president, in the middle of the presidency, and the very end when he was leaving office. And we had agreed to do the exit interview, and we were going to discuss what he learned and what advice he would have for, the successor, Madam President Hillary, and what message. It was an upbeat, optimistic look back on your successes. It's not going to be a hardball gotcha interview, but it was scheduled for the day after the election because they figured he'd be free at that point, and that's when we couldn't talk before the election. We had to talk after. Wake up go to sleep that night drunk, knowing we've completely been fucked. And so in the morning, I called up and said, "Do you want to put it off?" I could totally understand. We'll do it. And a week later, he said, "No, come down now. Let's do it." So we get down there. I went down, took my son Gus with me as a kind of a perk. And it was a gray day, it was cloudy, and Washington itself was dead quiet the day after the election. Get over to the White House, that's completely deserted. I've been there before, it's always bustling around, especially the president's there, but I think everybody's there, stayed up too late or dead drunk or whatever, or too depressed to face people. But, there's Obama in coat and tie, says, "Come on in, let's get this done with." And sat down, and I had to start a whole different kind of interview and scrounge different kind of questions, obviously. And the big thing is he wanted to say, what the happened? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to? And he didn't, you don't really want to press him on that point because, his job is to make the most hopeful case for, as a matter of what you should do and as a matter of tradition and respect for your successor, and put the nicest spin on it possible. But this one was hard to put a nice spin on. This is terrible. And we kept dancing around, and then finally he says, And he said smart things. He said, but he kept saying, well, I think, when he gets here, and somehow people change when they get in his chair, and there's that picture of Washington up there. And, I said, Mr. Obama, it's not, I don't think this man is capable of change. It's not going to, there's nothing to suggest. He said, look, if you want me and you want to get on the floor, curl up on the ball, and get all depressed, well, we can do that. We can sit and just do that. But, it's not a tragedy. It's not a tragedy. My mother dying of cancer is a tragedy. This is an election, and it'll have consequences, but there's an election coming up. And my advice to you is get to work. Get started. I hope this is going to get us nowhere. That was kind of it.
I wanted to ask you, you've had some health problems in the last few years, so it's good to see you doing this and making the rounds and talking about your life and career and all that. And you sold a magazine a few years ago, and Gus is now, your son Gus is now COO of it, running things. And you kind of, did you bow out gracefully or?
No.
No.
It's hard to,
And what about our generation? What's going to happen now? Is the
well, we can talk about me and the generation. Let's.
Yeah.
I'll try and do it in two parts. Even though I had long decided I wanted to stop at 50 years mark and give it up, I wanted to gracefully take a bow and leave. And pretty much it worked out essentially that way. Not exactly what I wanted, not the top of the game, but after the internet destroyed, on and on. But the idea of leaving your baby under whatever success is difficult and turning over to your son. As much as you want to, you're not used to that, and so I said, I was happy with them not selling it. That was fine. Gus running it was great. I understood I wasn't going to be in charge anymore. I had no problems with that, but I just still thought I knew more about it than anybody else, and they should listen to me. Well, you don't want to listen to me. He just bought it. You're going to run it, and Gus taking it. He'd worked there for 4 years, and he had his ideas what he wanted, and they really didn't want my ideas about it, and I kept thinking they would, naturally. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 months, I started to understand they really, really didn't. And I finally confronted them. I said, yeah, we don't, Anyway, I got the office upstairs, kicked upstairs, and it was fine. It was exactly the right thing. It was time for me to go. And it's tough. Our generation, I think what's going to happen, I think our generation is pretty much becoming adults in a really rich and satisfying way. Personally, I think people have been through, have gotten rewards and money and families and great circumstances, great culture. There's been a lot of rewards for this age group. And we haven't solved everything, but I think that we can certainly look back with pride and say we had a huge influential role in bringing about all kinds of human rights, women's rights, gay rights, getting rid of the drug war, racial equality, and a real kickstart to climate justice, or whatever you want to call that. Not all of it's been solved, but the progress was made between when the post-war baby boom started coming of age, and now it's staggering.
Yeah.
On the gay front, in the 50s, you could be arrested for being gay. You could actually go to jail. Now, you can get married, at the White House. That's a huge change, and what you can see on TV can't be. Same with blacks. It was Jim Crow still when we grew up.
Right.
And now you can be the President of the United States. This doesn't mean everything's solved. And our generation, and I hope subsequent generations will have a better or easier time learning that change doesn't come overnight. It's a youthful impulse. It's not going to, and just because it doesn't come overnight doesn't mean you haven't, pushed the problem along enormously. So all these things I think we can be proud of doing, and against real high odds and stubborn, recalcitrant adult culture and a government, really real adult stupidity in our time that has gone to war a number of times, that maintain we're not taking down these systems of injustice. I think that from what I can see, we've been able to give this knowledge and information and idea to our own children. Right. And that they will succeed us well in pushing this. I don't believe that the next generation is apathetic or angry or anything. I think they're turned on and look up to us and say, these guys, they had a great life, they did a good job, like that. So
It's a nice positive note to
Okay.
end on, the success of the movement
Good.
and passing the torch. So anyway, thank you, Jan. And I want to thank everyone who joined us here in person and online for this Commonwealth program. Very enlightening. Thanks so much. I also want to thank Relevant Wealth Advisors for the support of the program. This program and others like it will soon be online at the club's website, commonwealthclub.org. And thank you so much, Jan.
my pleasure.
Great.
Always good.
One more thing. I'm Paul Libertor, and this Commonwealth Club program is now adjourned.